Welcome, everyone. I'm excited today to be here for the second virtual summit series, United Actions for Environmentally Just and Regenerative Future, Fossil Fuel Free Bay Area. Good morning. Welcome to the City of Berkeley, Ohlone Territory. Thank you all for being here. I'm Cheryl Davila, founder of the CEMTF, former council member for the City of Berkeley. Back in June of 2018, our office put forth the fossil fuel-free resolution that passed, along with the climate emergency declaration that launched a lot of other cities, over 2006 cities or governments around the world followed suit on that climate emergency declaration. And the fossil fuel pollution and toxicity in our environment and corporate greed has led us to the health disparities, environmental racism, and injustice, which has ensured the climate crisis we now face, as well as the COVID impacts on the marginalized communities that have been subjected to these toxins. Corporate greed that looks like a billionaire and his friends and family taking a 10-minute joyride into space, depleting our ozone. The higher the rocket goes, the more fuel is required, the higher the environmental costs, the more greenhouse gas emissions, the more toxins are released. Bezos, why not invest that money in your community into saving our planet, saving lives, and invest in microgrids and EV charging and help folks get electrified with backup systems that will benefit many and not just a few? Why not invest in solving homelessness, reparations for our BIPOC community that have endured centuries of injustice? Just saying, Mr. Bezos. I was curious as to, I hadn't looked at the definition of fossil fuels in quite some time. So I thought I looked it up the other day. Fossil fuels, according to Google, I believe it was, a hydrocarbon fuels such as petroleum, coal, natural gas, derived from accumulated remains of ancient plants and animals and used as fuel. Excavation of ancient animals and plants is all the more reason to keep it in the ground. Why not invest in keeping it in the ground, Mr. Bezos, and financing alternatives that benefit the environment, the people, and the planet? Yikes, that's a little bit too much, but I thought I'd just start us off with I was thinking about that. So thank you all so much for joining us this morning. Thank you to the CEMTF Steering Committee and all the panelists and speakers, and my friend and colleague, Councilmember Eduardo Martinez, for being here, and all the volunteers, and special shout out to Steve Nadell for taking the lead on this series, and the Planning and Logistics Committee and the Legislative Committee, and for everyone who helped getting us here today. Zoom, our new lives. Sit back, listen, and get your coffee, tea, breakfast, because we're going to get started with an amazing person who brings love, wisdom, hope, and healing, who I thought was going to be here, which was Karina Gould, but she's not feeling well this morning, so she's not able to be here. So I'll do a land acknowledgement. If I can find it real quick, I just had it open. Okay. So I would like to take a moment to acknowledge that we are sitting on the territory of the Huichin, the ancestral and unceded land of the Chochenyo speaking Laotian Ohlone people. And I'm here in Berkeley, and welcome the Berkeley signs have Ohlone it says, welcome to Berkeley, Ohlone territory. So that's an amazing thing to have in our city. And we must recognize that every member of the community has and continues to benefit from the use and occupation of this land. So welcome to the Fossil Fuel Free Bay Area Summit today. And I'm going to turn it over to Amos White, who's going to tell us about our day. And I'm also just have to say, I'm super excited today because my 92-year-old dad is coming to visit. Yay! So if I'm a little spaced, that's why. So thank you all and enjoy the day. Go ahead,
Thank you,
Amos.
Cheryl. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Amos White. I'm Vice Chair of the Climate Emergency Mobilization Task Force, and really thankful and grateful, Cheryl, for your welcoming opening, really apropos and to the point. I have the pleasure and honor of introducing today Eduardo Martinez, council member of the city of Richmond. Eduardo was born in Texas, but moved to the Bay Area in the 70s, I should say, in his teens. His parents, he's worked in the West Contra Costa County School District for a couple decades, where he's been very involved with parents and children there, and particularly working with parents of Richmond, of the Richmond children, to impact poor children and youth in working with the educational system. He cares very deeply about his community and has been very involved in a number of initiatives, which include protecting the environment, strengthening police review process, increasing the minimum wage there, where he's been a champion for stabilizing rents, and transferring public money from jail expansion to public services. He's a member of the Richmond Progressive Alliance and has been with the Climate Emergency Mobilization Task Force since its inception. Please join me in welcoming Eduardo Martinez.
Thank you for the introduction. Stockton and Richmond have the loading of coal onto ships in common, but we in Richmond have passed an ordinance that will prohibit it in the near future. We also have another thing in common with Stockton, and that is the waking of the people to the climate chaos that's upon us. On the front page of today's East Bay Times is an article called "Richmond Not Sympathizing with Chevron." And on July 28th in the Sacramento Bee, there was an article called "Communities of Color in Stockton Want Cleaner Air Where They Live. Is California listening?" And I believe that California is listening, but not closely enough. We need California to pass stronger rules. We need more doing and less talking. So it's not news to you, but we're leading the way toward a just transition with these symposiums, with grassroots organizing, and with the electing of officials to positions of influence. We're beginning to control the narrative of which the fossil fuel industry has long held sway. This narrative is a narrative that includes all aspects of just transition. Not only do we need to make sure that the air, the soil, the water remain clean, but we need to make sure that the language that we use when we talk about people of color, when we talk about how we move forward economically, these are important. We need to make sure that when we say Black Lives Matter, Black Lives Matter, and we don't dilute it with other sayings. In Richmond, we have our Richmond Our Power Coalition, which is an alliance of groups that are featured, that feature different aspects of just transition. One of the speakers today is from our power, and it's important that we recognize that all aspects of society are necessary in terms of moving towards this just transition. We need to make sure that we hold our industry accountable. And we need to make sure that Sacramento gives us the ability to hold them accountable. Right now, we don't have the ability to fine. We don't have the ability to make sure that there is some sort of financial repercussions to industry. Those are things that we're working on, and we'll be speaking to that. So I believe that there's so much information that we need to share that I'm gonna just roll it over.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Steve Nadell. I'm with the Sunflower Alliance. We've been working since 2012 in the refinery corridor to protect our local frontline communities from the fact that we are the most highly concentrated area of oil refining in the West Coast. We have 5 refineries within a 25-mile radius of our frontline communities. And we're going to start off talking today with a presentation on Richmond, protecting the land, centering and transforming our communities, with 3 key people who've been working with Eduardo for a long time. As Eduardo mentioned, we have the Richmond Our Power Coalition, and Kat Ramus, a coordinator of that, will launch our speaking today to talk about how we center the collective work required to transform our community and ensure that local stewardship occurs for a just transition. And she'll be followed by Floyd Andrews, an environmental attorney focusing on local government policy and practice, and Tess Sadek, another environmental and civil rights attorney with a municipal law background. And they will both speak to the efforts in Richmond to protect the land from abandonment by the refineries, and to ensure that local governments have the resources for cleanup, tax replacement, and safety commissioning. So I'll turn it over and let Kat launch our day today.
Thank you, Steve. And thanks everyone for being here. My name is Kat Ramos. I am the coordinator for Richmond Our Power Coalition. And I have the ability to share with you all of the wonderful work of our coalition, which is a group of 9 grassroots organizations who are focused, as Eduardo said, on various parts of the just transition model that will move us away from the extractive economic model that we are sadly having to exist under, and to something that is generative, regenerative, and also in harmony with the land. So I'm going to share a short presentation and then allow for you to hear from the other members of our coalition through a video that we compiled, and you can hear from them about their passion, their work. And I believe Eduardo is also on that video, so you'll get to hear from him as well. So I'm going to share my screen. All right, hopefully everyone can see that. All right, perfect, wonderful. So we started with a land acknowledgement, and it's important for the story of Richmond to include our original stewards of the land, and those are the Ohlone people. And they are the original stewards of the lands that we currently inhabit. The city of Richmond has taken many iterations of perceived progress through industry that has led us far away from the Richmond we want to live and thrive in. We're looking to guide our community to democratically steward us into a future that honors the collective peoples whose cultures and traditions breathe life into our city to this day. For nearly 100 years, Richmond residents have lived downwind of a refinery that has impacted and severely influenced the physical and political landscape of our beloved city, ravaging the land, the water, and the air our community relies on. The continued disenfranchisement, redlining, food apartheid, health conditions, and intentional misinformation campaigns have fueled the righteous rage and passionate dedication our community members are using to forge a path to a generative ecosystem utilizing this just transition model. Here we have the work of our multi-organization capital projects held by Urban Tilth, by Cooperation Richmond, by Richmond Land, and Rich City Rides. And this is just an example of some of the work that we're holding. We have the North Richmond Farm expansion, our cooperative grocery store, the tiny home eco village, and a Black wellness hub, all of which are in process of being started. The North Richmond Farm is actually existent. We're just expanding on it. And these create hubs for access to resources, food, meeting places, access to things that aren't existing in our city currently. Thousands of pounds of food, fresh food coming directly from the ground, access to more economic stability, access to resources for wellness that we don't have currently right now, and sustainability, access to own a home. Those are all resilient things that we are working on to ensure that our community stays here. Additionally to that, we're building people power. So hosting people's assemblies, building our member base, building our voter base, and through direct action, taking on these things that are important to the community. So we have building power and transition projects that are partners like CBE, RPA, APEN, ACE, and Safe Return Project actually direct. Our coalition is leaving the extractive and violent economy behind through political education, mobilization, and participation in transforming the landscape to mirror the needs of the community. We're looking beyond extraction, centering the many ways we transform our community together, communally, justly, and in harmony with the land, because we are of the land. Our vision is complex and includes intricate plans over decades that are reinvigorating Richmond. And something to keep in mind, it's truly as simple as everyone and every living thing having what they need to participate in a regenerative ecosystem. So we're focused on ecological and social well-being, focused on caring and sacredness, focused on deep democracy, on regeneration, and on cooperation. And with that, I will leave it to the words of the rest of our coalition. I hope you can hear this.
I've always been involved with different organizations in Richmond, and there came a point where, not only did my family have to move away from our previous city, where we used to live, that we called home, but I started to see families that I cared about having to move away. Black, brown, BIPOC families who were no longer going to schools here, were no longer my neighbors. And so I started to see that there was a correlation between the advocacy we were doing in schools and the fact that people just couldn't live here anymore. And so if we couldn't advocate for better schools and people were being pushed out of our city, then it just didn't seem fair to me. And I was like, we need to do something about the issues around housing. Yeah, Richmond Land is focused on housing development. We are beginning developers working with the community to build and design projects for the community and with the community. We focus on developments in Richmond and West Contra Costa in order to support anti-displacement and to keep community in Richmond.
Well, I've always wanted to be part of a organization with a mission, and I thought Urban Tilth was a great entry level for it, and because it's their mission is to train, so you're like learning as you're, whereas like other jobs it's just you have to come here with like 5 years of experience, and you know it can be pretty exclusive. But I think here you have more of a like a welcoming spirit, especially for our residents, because it's important to, like I saw that they really wanted to attract people who are in the city that like they're serving. Our primary mission is to not only make sure, well, to fight food insecurity. Ideally, we'd want everybody to have access to healthy food, but right now we just got to take it a little bit at a time. So the way we tackle that is by first providing food, like either through our deliveries or through our farm stands, and also by educating the residents and our youth in how to grow their own food, whether it be at their home garden or a community garden or a school garden. For the future of Urban Tilt, even though it is like a North Richmond farm and that's what we call our like main base, I see it more like a university for Richmond residents, and like prioritizing resident-centered visions rather than like savior-centered visions, because I feel like we have a lot of people who come into our community trying to like save us, but there's no acknowledgement of like the root causes of our hardships.
My favorite part is being in the community and learning from them, you know, finding out who it is that I'm representing. Focus of the Richmond Progressive Alliance is to take power away from corporations and give it back to the people, give it back to the community. And we do this by engaging the community to elect progressive candidates and to push progressive agendas. Okay, as an elementary school teacher, I realize that each and every one of us is a teacher, and we teach by what we do. So our responsibility is to hold community together, and what I'm trying to do by continuing this work is to be intentional in what I do, because I know that everything that I do is teaching the community.
I want Richmond to be the model city. I want Richmond to be the model city for formerly incarcerated people and the communities that support them. I want us to be environmentally safe. I want us to be environmentally sound. And I want us to be healthy. And I also want us to be a model for the rest of the cities, for the rest of the counties, as a community ran by community. Well, Safe Return Project, our vision and mission is to empower and increase the visibility of all those impacted by the criminal justice system. We are invested deeply in building power and building our base on a state and national level and centering formerly incarcerated people and our rights. My inspiration and drive comes from people that have already been doing this work, and how they've laid out the avenues and how they've laid out all the workshops and the learning opportunities for folks to get involved. And me, myself, I experienced the criminal justice system in many various ways. And I find that it doesn't serve all of us in the way that we had intended it to. And so, you know, I am inspired to continue the work that they have started and to be of use and to change the community as the person of change.
Communities for a Better Environment is a California-based environmental justice organization dedicated to empowering local communities to advocate against the legacy pollution that exists in their community, as well as to envision what the future would be like after a just transition to a sustainable and renewable economy. And so I always had an interest in preserving nature, enjoying nature, but then growing up here in Richmond, I became aware of the impact of Chevron and the petrochemical industry, both the harmful effects to the health of our people, as well as the harm to our politics and the corruption of our local politics. And I was always interested in history and politics. I majored in political science at UC Berkeley. My ultimate vision for Richmond is a healthy, diverse community that has gotten rid of the industrial polluters has cleaned up the legacy pollution sites like AstraZeneca, that has rebuilt the urban core without the gentrification, and has been able to preserve and convert open space into parks and other recreational facilities to help, the community be healthy.
So we've been organizing the Laotian community since 1993, and it was originally called the Laotian Organizing Project. And one of the big things that we noticed within our communities was that people were suffering from higher rates of respiratory issues and cancers. Like, I don't know how many people in my family have died from cancers or various cancers, and how many of us grew up with asthma or just like had respiratory issues. After living through multiple refinery explosions from Chevron and living through the General Chemical spill, a lot of people in the community realized that, these big polluters and these big corporations have been poisoning our community. And for us, we decided that, enough is enough, and we started organizing around that. And that's kind of how APEN started. So throughout that whole time, we were able to establish the multilingual warning system that was able to warn a lot of the Southeast Asian community, like when another refinery explosion happened, that we would have to shelter in place, and it would be in language so that people, who don't speak the language are able to be well informed to understand if they need to go inside the house. The just transition model is like rooted in, moving away from, an extractive economy, one that's rooted in militarism and capitalism, to one that's more regenerative. And that kind of goes hand in hand with my identity and a lot of the people's identity here in Richmond.
My deepest connection to Richmond is my family. Like, I have a long line of family that's been here for generations, and my whole entire family lives here. And that's my deepest connection to Richmond. So when I think about taking care of Richmond, I think about taking care of my family, just everybody. My ultimate vision for Richmond is to see our economy thrive, our people thrive, just building off of their own selves, their human capital, and thriving in longevity wealth, and breaking those barriers to inequalities of distributing wealth within our communities. Our work functions in the Just Transition framework because we develop and we launch worker-owned cooperative enterprises and cooperative enterprises for Richmond, California residents. A new wave of thinking, a new wave of allowing ourselves to become the people that make our economy thrive, the people that employ ourselves. We are the bosses, pretty much,
Rich City Rise, the community organization, is a nonprofit that starts things like the bike shop and is looking to start other things that work from the same model of the bike shop in a cooperative fashion. So this is a worker-owned cooperative, meaning that everybody who works here either has a pathway to becoming one of the owners or already is one of the owners. We want to model that because your workplace is one of the most undemocratic areas of your life, but it's also one of the parts of your life where you spend the most time. What inspires me is actually I put a lot of inspiration from the members and staff and community members and volunteers in our organization. They've done everything from inspire the name, to inspire what we do, to inspire what we created, to inspire what the future looks like. It's all pulled from community. So as we consider like new enterprises, well, we keep that in mind. And we look at how we can work with our partners in order to bring these things to light. So groups like Cooperation Richmond, folks like APEN, folks like CBE, the Safe Return Project, we're all working. We're kind of like, you say just transition, we are the Justice League of the transition. We want to create a rich city. A rich city is one where, when you think of like things, think of a rich empire, right? Or a rich kingdom. In all these historic scenarios, it was the few that were really affluent and had the gold and gilded everything. And then you also had the poor people who had little to nothing. the concept of rich needs to be transitioned justly. A rich city, a rich kingdom, a rich empire is one where everybody has what they need. You cannot, it actually doesn't make sense that a rich city would have poor people in it, you know, or a rich planet has folks that need but don't have. So the vision that, you know, my vision, and I think our vision for Richmond, for Rich City Rides, is the rich city where everybody has what they need.
You for taking the time to listen right from the voices of the folks doing this work. I have the privilege of working with each and every one of those folks in community to help bring this vision forward for us. And I will now pass it on over to Floyd and Tess to continue our discussion with how we get there. Thank you.
Thank you, Kat. Thanks so much for that. That video, I've seen it before. It always inspires me so much. I love all those voices and the vision. Yeah. Let's see, I'm showing later. The host has spotlighted your video. Okay, very good. Unmute myself. Great. So it's really great to be here. I'm going to jump right in because we have certain time constraints today. We're looking to hold fossil fuel responsible for the impacts, specifically many of the impacts, and also the environmental impacts that they've had on our local community. You know, I was going to spend some time talking about Chevron. I feel like most people on this at this webinar have a good sense about, especially from that last video, the impact that Chevron has had on our community and on the environment. It occupies 13% of Chevron's land mass. It's been operating since 1902. That was before the city was incorporated. Now it processes 17,000 tons of toxic waste every year. And it also has, you know, vast amounts of fossil fuel products stored on the hills right by the bay, right by Richmond. Chevron has had numerous environmental accidents over the decades, and it's been operating for 75 years before there were any environmental controls implemented at any level of government in the country. And so when Chevron decommissions, it's obvious that there will be a massive environmental mess for somebody to clean up. And that's what I'm, Tess and I will be addressing today. You know, the city of Richmond is such a gem in so many ways. The community, the people, the history, and also the geography. I mean, it's right on the bay, incredible views, beautiful sunsets, hills, valleys, part of the vibrant Bay Area community, and so the land must be restored. It needs to be available for humans and other creatures on the planet to sort of re-inhabit when Chevron wraps up. And so that sort of brings up this idea, when Chevron wraps up, how do we transition? And there are a lot of different definitions of a just transition, and I would just like to re-acknowledge the pillars that Kat delivered to us and her community: ecological and social well-being, caring and sacredness, deep democracy, regeneration and cooperation. A culture that provides for all of that is what Richmond is hoping for itself. these are sort of the underpinnings of a caring society that focuses more on humans and human potential than on money and power. To make this happen, especially to be able to restore the land, we do need some economic assistance. We are needing to look to the state government, the federal government for the transitioning economy that will allow people employed in fossil fuel to transition to other more regenerative work. We need an economy that can support the indirect workers, not just the workers who are currently working in the industry. We're going to need reparations for impacted communities that have just historically borne the burden of the fossil fuel industry. And we're going to need support for local government as it moves to a new tax revenue structure. And what we're talking about today is we're going to need land restoration and environmental remediation, and that is expensive. And so the question that we need to ask ourselves is, who is going to pay for the remediation? In 1980, the federal government passed the Comprehensive Environmental Response, Compensation, and Liability Act, oftentimes known as Superfund and also known as CERCLA. And this act, this was back when fossil fuel industrial sites were sort of randomly combusting. And we really, in this country, were facing massive impacts from environmental degradation. And the government created a super fund. It was a trust fund, and it was paid for by taxes on fossil fuel and other polluting industries. And it always was the idea of the polluter pays. And the way that they created a big fund to clean up those massive toxic sites was by taxing industry. And that money was used, and we did clean up a lot of sites with that money. Unfortunately, in 1995, the Superfund tax ended. So industry was no longer required to fund this pool of money to remediate environmental sites. And so communities were left basically on their own to figure out how to get sites that were sort of like legacy polluted sites cleaned up. And it sort of like created a scenario where the only way that you can get a site cleaned up is to enter into some kind of an agreement to redevelop the site. And then the developer comes up with a plan to clean up the site. And generally they're trying to do the cheapest cleanup they can because it's largely profit oriented, the redevelopment. And that's where we've been. And that's what has encouraged us to try to find things we can do at the local level or the state level to try to clean up our contaminated sites. But now I have to say I'm so excited and inspired by what I see happening at the federal level. I mean, it's true, we're not getting everything that President Biden has been asking for, but a lot is happening. President Biden is putting environmental justice, climate change, and land restoration at the top of every major plan that he has in place for the nation. And that means for Richmond. The American Rescue Plan, as we know, passed. That plan included $100 million for disproportionately impacted populations from environmental harms. The money is still being sorted out, but my expectation is that Richmond and other fossil fuel impacted communities will see some huge benefit from that. And then we also recently, just like in the past 2 days, are hearing that the bipartisan infrastructure bill will be moving forward. I mean, it's not the $3.5 to $4 trillion bill that Biden was putting forth that would have like reimagined the country. But still, it's a huge bill. It's $1.2 trillion, and it includes a very clear line item for $21 billion for environmental remediation. We haven't seen that kind of funding for remediation in this country for 2 decades. That is going to have substantial impact, and it. In the next slide, I'll be talking about Biden's Justice 40 initiative. And that initiative will ensure that more than our fair share of that 21 billion will be coming in our direction. And then Biden has put forth the American Jobs Plan. That plan, that sort of like bucket of programs will hopefully be put into the reconciliation plan that's upcoming. And it includes $5 billion more for brownfields and Superfund site cleanup. And then I should say the infrastructure bill that Biden had originally put forth also included restoration of the Superfund tax. And from my perspective, that is key to an ongoing ability for communities to remediate highly toxic sites. Unfortunately, the bipartisan bill took the tax out. So we'll wait and see what happens with that. So Justice 40, President Biden has been talking about this for some months and issued an executive order around it. And just 10 days ago, 3 departments of the federal government published their guidance on the Justice 40 initiative. And the Justice 40 initiative says that 40% of all of the benefits coming out of the newly provided funding must go to disadvantaged communities. These, when I say with respect to the covered programs. So any covered program that Biden is funding through these large new funding mechanisms, 40% of the benefits must go to disadvantaged communities. And this slide, they describe what covered programs are and what disadvantaged communities are. And when you look at the detail, you'll see that Richmond and many of the communities in the Bay Area, and largely those impacted by fossil fuel, fall within the disadvantaged community category. And then the covered programs, lots of covered programs, and a number of those have to do with restoring and remediating pollution. So there will be, so 40% of the money that now is being passed through Congress will be set aside for communities like Richmond. It's very exciting. Over the next few years, I think we will see the financial ability to make the dream of restoring our lands here in Richmond and elsewhere a reality. Recently, just I think last month, the Political Economy Research Institute published a report. And the report describes how, and the report was commissioned by labor unions, and it was endorsed by 18 different unions, including the United Steelworkers Union. And Steelworkers Union has employees that work at Chevron, Marathon, PBF, Phillips 66. The report describes how transitioning away from fossil fuel will actually be highly beneficial for workers. And it specifically talks about how a large number of jobs will be created in this process of land restoration. Oftentimes you hear the labor unions setting up, and the fossil fuel industry really setting up this dichotomy of fossil fuel, if you take it away, we're not going to have any jobs. If you want jobs, you need fossil fuel. It's just not true. Moving away from fossil fuel will create many diverse jobs and will be supportive of a new clean economy. It is a possibility, and we're finally seeing labor acknowledge that, and change is coming. Another thing that CERCLA did back in 1980 was it said that, and I'm going to quote here, the president shall promulgate requirements that classes of facilities establish and maintain evidence of financial responsibility consistent with the degree and duration of basically their pollution. What that says is the president shall create laws that require the fossil fuel industry to set aside money, financial responsibility for their pollution. That's basically financial assurances. There's been some talk about risk bonds and financial assurances and letters of credit. It's basically that, saying that you, fossil fuel industry, you must set aside money to clean up your mess when you leave. Financial assurance. After CERCLA was passed, that never happened. There was some back and forth with EPA trying, it just kind of got stuck in the bureaucratic wheels of government for all these years. But the statute still exists. And it's something that the EPA can act on. Earth Justice filed a comment letter with the EPA last year. It was written by Amanda Gooden, and it was on behalf of Communities for a Better Environment, Sierra Club, Center for Biological Diversity, among others. Very well written and insightful comment to EPA saying, EPA, act on this, require the fossil fuel industry to provide financial assurance that they will pay for their mess. That was in February 2020. In December of 2020, like the tail end of the Trump administration, the EPA declined to require that, and they set a rulemaking saying that the current regulatory environment is good enough. We don't need to ask for financial assurances. Well, it turns out that the Biden administration has made indications that suggest they might be relooking at this. It also applies to the mining, to the remediation of mines. And Biden has specifically said that the EPA will be relooking at the rule and might be requiring financial assurances from mining entities. And there was some suggestion that months ago, he was also talking about fossil fuel, but that's not currently included. But that's something that we as community members and activists should take on. We should be at this time pounding the doors of EPA saying we want financial assurances required by the federal government. Now I'm going to hand it over to Tess, because there's also a lot we can do on our local level and our municipal level. So Tess, I'm going to hand it to you.
Thank you. Yes, good morning, everybody. Yeah, my name is Tasfai Sadiq. I'm an attorney in Oakland here. I practice in the area of toxic tort litigation. I was a former city attorney, and I am familiar with municipal laws. And really, it's very interesting discussion today. I think my job today is really to make everybody understand legally what power does the city have to enforce some kind of restriction, elimination on the production of fossil fuel. I think that really starts from understanding the fact that Richmond City is a charter city. A charter city is different from a general law city. A charter city has really like a sovereign power. It has the full legislative power. The state cannot restrict or limit its full legislative power. That's really very important for us. We are dealing with sovereign power of Richmond City with respect to what it can do within its boundaries. The law says, that the city has complete authority over its municipal affairs. What does that mean? The term municipal affairs is really very elastic, but the core point is really the city has the power to zone within its boundaries. The state cannot limit that power. Through zoning, the city can limit the activities of fossil fuel companies within its boundaries. And the other is, the public health and safety. The state has full authority over the public health and safety of its citizens within its boundaries. The only limitation really that is imposed on the cities like Richmond is the Constitution of California and the federal Constitution, and also the preemption authority of the federal power. And that is really the area where the bad guys use to challenge the action of the cities like Richmond. These are preemption, means that there is a statute that is enacted by the federal government, which says that the state, the federal government has complete authority in that area. That will be express preemption by the federal government. The federal government does not want the city to enact anything in that area. The good thing is, there are very limited statutes that expressly preempt local authorities. Most of the battle is really around the area of implied authority, where the federal government enacted some statute, doesn't say the city cannot enact in this area. It simply it is quiet. In those areas, there is a context. And some of the example of really preemptive statutes are really the federal, especially with respect to fossil fuel. There is the Federal Railway Act. There is the Interstate Commerce Commission Termination Act, which regulates, railway transportation. There is also Pipeline Act, which Pipeline Safety Act, which regulates, the safety of pipeline. In those areas, the federal government has some preemptive power. Even in those areas, if the health and safety of the community is paramount, the federal government would not really assert its preemptive power, or the court would not acknowledge the preemptive power of the state, the city. And the other area of where it's important for us to understand, where is, the Commerce Clause. In fact, most of the city ordinances are challenged by the bad guys under the Commerce Clause. The Commerce Clause gives the federal authority complete authority to protect, to conduct interstate. So as long as the city ordinance really focuses on a conduct that is entirely within the city boundaries, that suggests, to everybody that the city is not acting extraterritorially, is not conducting any discrimination against any outside entities. It's ordinances are entirely for conducts designed within its boundaries, like, for example, controlling, the terminals. These are really entirely within the city. And sure, the bad guys have been arguing, that is preempted because, there is a railway connection with that terminal. If the conduct the city is regulating is simply the storage and handling of fossil fuel at that particular site, without really dealing with the transportation of it, that is something that the city can do. I will come later on when we talk about the Levin terminal regulation ordinance that was enacted by the city. So those are the areas that we have to be aware and vigilant. The other area is really the due process clause, where the defendant simply claims, that their property value is diminished, their property is interfered by the city ordinance. In those areas, I think, what is important to know is, as long as the city enacts an ordinance which is designed for the health and safety of the people, if that is the paramount interest of the city, and its action is designed to carry out that purpose, courts usually defer that to the city ordinance. They would not impose due process violation. That would be a substantive due process violation. That only arises if the ordinance has no relationship to any health and safety concern, has no relationship to anything else, to the general welfare. If it is considered extremely unreasonable and arbitrary, that's when the court will strike out that ordinance. So those are the areas I think, that we should be aware. And also, really many cities now where they have fossil fuel have been bold enough to enact ordinances which restrict or attempt to eliminate fossil fuel production. I'll give you an example. The city of Benicia nearby. What it did was, the planning commission denied a conditional use permit to Valero, which wanted to establish a terminal to offload crude oil transported from other areas. Benicia City Council denied the conditional permit. The bad guys challenged that, and on the ground of preemption, the board, the Surface Transportation Board, acknowledged, they have preemptive power over the city, but in this case, the city ordinance was designed entirely for the safety and health of the community. That is because when the city passed the ordinance, the city specifically made a finding that it is only dealing with the handling and transportation of the crude oil there at that site. And also they made a finding, that this new terminal was designed to receive crude oil from North Dakota and tar from Canada, which the city found to be highly flammable. Because of that, the ordinance was considered to be consistent with the authority of the city to protect the health and safety of the city. The same way, I would say, the Richmond, the Levin Richmond Terminal Corporation, which the case is still pending. I think the city of Richmond made a good finding about imposing restrictions, elimination of the terminal based on public safety, health concern. And there was a clear finding made by the city. The case is still pending, but at the same time, the company was challenging the city of Richmond on the ground, that it's violates commerce clause because it interferes with the authority of the federal government. It is preempted by the Railway Statute and by the Interstate Commerce Termination Act. They are also claiming, that the finding made by the city that the Levin terminal actually creates, particle materials that affects people's health. They're claiming, that is not entirely produced by Levin Corporation. So what we learn from all this really is, when the city enacts an ordinance regulating fossil fuel companies, the city should really make, as long as the city makes a very thorough finding of adverse health effect. If it makes, a survey, a study, if it takes its action based on those kind of study, it has a higher chance of being approved by the courts. The courts don't really go into questioning, the wisdom of the city, the efficacy of their measure. They look at really whether the city has a reasonable basis to enact this ordinance, as long as you make those kind of findings. With that, I complete my submission. Thank you.
I want to thank our presenters, Floyd Andrews, Tess, and Kat Ramos for an excellent presentation and leadership in terms of how Richmond is showing us a model of how we can move forward from fossil fuels to a just transition. And now we're going to move to a presentation which will take us to a broader level of examples based on the Stand.Earth Safe Cities program, where we'll look at how their fossil fuel overview is moving local governments away from fossil fuels to protect the local health, safety, and climate, and look at things like the land use restrictions on new fossil fuel facilities, gas station bans, building electrification, and other things. So we're going to have two speakers, Matt Crow, an oil and gas activist and a co-director of Stand.Earth Safe Cities program, and Zai, a native of Los Angeles and a climate campaigner with Safe Cities. And they will take us through this Safe Cities program. So I will turn it over to Matt and Zai.
Cool. Well, thanks so much, everybody. And it's great to see you. That was really inspirational. Kat, thanks so much for I love the rich city vision that you brought for folks. And Tess, thank you for the overview of yes, you can. So I think Zai and I are going to talk about what you can and sort of meld the two different components there of we would love a vision. Yes, we can do it. What are some specific things we can do with fossil fuels? And so what we have for you for the next 45 minutes is I'm going to drone on for, sorry. We're going to have a quick presentation. Zai is going to give you an overview of the sort of the Safe Cities program, where it came from and what we do. And I'm going to dive a little bit deeper into sort of the details of things that the types of policies around fossil fuels that local governments have taken or can take. And then we go to a breakout session, because what we'd really love to have is people sharing with each other, no matter which city or county you're in around San Francisco, like what cool stuff you've seen going on, what cool stuff you would like to have, what kinds of opportunities there might be to do more work on fossil fuels in the future, and what kind of support you might need. So realistically, we're going to have most of this time for you talking to each other about safe city type policies in sort of 3 different buckets. With that, I will turn it over to Zai.
Thank you so much, Matt. And hello, good morning, everybody. It's so incredible to see 57 of us here today. That's a really powerful group of individuals working toward, eliminating fossil fuel in a just transition. So I am going to really briefly kind of go over Stand.Earth, where we came from, who we are, and the Safe Cities movement before handing it back to Matt. So yes, STAND is an advocacy organization, and we bring together people to demand that corporations and governments put the people and the environment first. We focus on cleaning up some of the world's most polluting industries, stopping fossil fuel expansion, and protecting biodiversity hotspots. Stand.Earth was founded nearly 20 years ago by a group that was of dedicated people working to stop the logging of rare 1,000-year-old forests off the coast of British Columbia. Indigenous communities have lived there since time immemorial, and their lands were being logged at an alarming rate, putting their way of life and biogem at risk. So we were really founded to figure out which companies were selling products made from these 1,000-year-old trees, holding the companies accountable through really high-profile actions and discussions with executives, making sure that customers knew what was in their products, and then protecting the forests. So over the past 20 years, our tools have really evolved to take on an issue that not only threatens forests, but to really address climate as well. So in places like Alberta with the tar sands and Whatcom County in Washington State, we've brought the power of market campaigns and community organizing to stop new pipelines and fossil fuel infrastructure projects that threaten communities and our environment. So today, our campaigns use research, media, grassroots organizing, negotiation, and direct action to really shift the behavior of governments and industries and stand with frontline communities. Now, about safe cities, SAFE stands for Standing Against Fossil Fuel Expansion. And we're basically a growing movement of neighbors, local groups, elected officials, working toward phasing out fossil fuels and fast tracking clean energy solutions to a just transition. So let's see. A little bit more on context for the Safe Cities campaign. You know, the science is clear. The fossil fuel industry threatens global climate and the health and safety of local communities, particularly Black and Indigenous peoples, people of color, low-income communities. And yet, despite the dire warnings, the oil and gas sector, which represents, you know, the highest, fastest growing source of greenhouse gas emissions, intends to continue to expand. To make matters worse, our national governments are really not moving fast enough. But cities at the municipal level can play a key role in stopping fossil fuel expansion by exercising their regulatory powers to protect the health and safety of their residents. They're more nimble and they're more easily impacted by organized campaigns. They're also less polarized and they have more political room and fewer partisan roadblocks around implementing strong climate policy. The problem is that many municipalities don't even know that they have the jurisdictional authority to implement safe policies. They're oftentimes understaffed, they're under-resourced, and they're kind of nervous about taking on risks because they're being constantly lobbied hard by the gas industry and oil industry to protect the demand for those products. Hence the Safe Cities campaign. We're organizing to get local elected officials to pass safe commitments and policies that will prevent fossil fuel companies from getting local permits to build more fossil fuel projects and accelerating the clean energy transition through electrification. So now with that, I will pass it back over to Matt Krogh for more. Thank you.
Hey there, thanks, Ai. Yeah, so my dog is done with his breakfast, so hopefully the loud chewing won't be as overwhelming as it was for me a second ago. But yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, so the entire purpose of the Safe Cities campaign really is to find ways for local jurisdictions, whether it's a city or county, to act on the powers that Tess was just describing for us all about, you know, all the different ways that some things are preempted, and I think city and county staff have real concerns. But what we're going to talk about a little bit right now are places where you definitely can take action, and people have been taking action I'll link to some examples in a bit, and then go to the breakout groups. And so for us, what we're looking at when we talk to people taking action in local governments, there's sort of these 4 categories of things. Like 1, resolutions. A resolution could be an endorsement of the Safe City ideas, endorsement of the need for a just transition. We work closely with the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty, which is an international effort to actually get commitments from national governments around the world to take action on, what we call supply side policies. So whether it's extraction or midstream infrastructure, refineries, that sort of thing, all the stuff, oil, gas, coal, and even the word fossil fuels that were left out of the Paris Agreement. And I think, this group probably knows that, but it's so shocking to a lot of other people in sort of the climate movement who aren't dealing with refineries, who aren't dealing with fossil fuels when they discover that, or we tell them, most of these climate agreements don't mention the cause of climate change, 80% of the cause of climate change in the form of fossil fuels. So the resolution step is one way to at least start saying, hey, our city, our county is going to take action on fossil fuels. We're going to endorse the fossil fuel treaty. We're going to endorse safe city concepts. We're going to push for a just transition. That's sort of the first step, but it's not really the actionable stuff we're looking for. The temporary restrictions, where I live, I think I may be the token Washingtonian on this call. I'm in Whatcom County, about 90 miles north of Seattle. And 5 years ago, we passed a temporary emergency moratorium on any permitting for new fossil fuels, fossil fuel facilities. And that was renewed 10 times until, and I'll talk to you in a second, until this last Tuesday. But those sorts of emergency moratoriums, and I would actually value Tess's advice on this a little bit later. Like, I don't know if they're available to every charter city in California or both charter and general cities, but there's a climate emergency right now, and we can pass climate emergency resolutions, which don't necessarily have teeth, but intent. An emergency moratorium has teeth. Thirdly, permanent restrictions. And so permanent restrictions can come into play largely through land use, as Tess was talking about. There are other venues through which you can find a route towards permanent restrictions, but making sure that no new fossil fuel facilities get built. And when I say facilities, I'm including pipelines, oil train offloading facilities like we're defeated in Richmond, Benicia, Pittsburgh, refinery expansions, new refineries, new export facilities, you name it. And then finally, this whole category of electrification or decarbonization, where all new building standards can be all electric, requirements for retrofitting of buildings like the gas bans in Berkeley that Cheryl was talking about, all these sorts of things, and transportation. So
Matt just went on mute.
Thank you. So apparently I've been skipping ahead everything, but these safe resolutions in particular, I want to talk about this Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty. It's sort of a sister campaign for us with SAFE. And there's a vision right now that all this local organizing, that all the different stuff that people are doing at city and county level can actually create a groundswell of momentum for more federal action. Like Floyd was talking about, there is some encouraging stuff happening right now with the Biden administration, but by and large, has been a real failure at the federal level in this country, definitely in Canada, and most countries of the world, to do anything real on fossil fuels. So we're hoping that this SAFE movement can create a groundswell of support for national action here and in other countries. Land use. This is the one that's really exciting right now. So as Tess alluded to, we have a number of different tools, including zoning, to actually take action to prevent new fossil fuel infrastructure and to phase out that infrastructure. And up until this week, I would have showed you this slide. Here in Whatcom County, we've had the potential emissions in this right-hand column. It was almost, actually we're missing one there. It was almost triple Washington State's entire carbon footprint proposed in separate projects to be built here over the course of the last 10 or 11 years. And so this left-hand side, you see we have an emergency moratorium is put in place, putting things on hold. As of Tuesday night, we have passed a ban on all new fossil fuel infrastructure in Whatcom County. It's a permanent ban. We will have no more threats of all these different projects. We do have the potential for small refinery expansions, but we changed the rules, which is a good thing to do with the fossil fuel industry, where in the past they were able to get permits solely like through an administrative process with staff, which the public never heard about. And so unlike the successful fights in Contra Costa against oil train terminals, we didn't even know, and they were building 2 of them before we knew about the permitting. Now the new rules require every new fossil fuel expansion at these refineries, and we have 2. Actually, we have 4 within 25 miles. All new permits for expansion of any sort are going to have public consideration, public involvement process, appeal processes. So I think although we do have the potential for expansion, the chances of it getting past our highly active and involved public who have been working on these safe policies with us, I think are minimal. So I can circulate some of these articles that came out yesterday and today after this session today, if people are interested. And then this other category really is electrification of buildings and transportation. And so as we're going to have some breakout sessions right now, there's so much that has happened in and around California, in particular in the building electrification. I know work has been going on in San Jose and Silicon Valley on transportation, but these types of policies are some, I think, of the more effective when done broadly and by a lot of people to really get after the fossil fuel industry. There was a quote from, and somebody might remember her name, I don't right now, the chair of the Western States Petroleum Association 2 years ago, speaking to the American Gas Association. And Cheryl, I'm sorry they didn't mention you personally, but they mentioned the Berkeley gas ban and said, you know, just imagine if everybody did this, if there were, you know, hundreds of cities around the country did what they did in Berkeley, it would be death by 1,000 cuts. And I want that to inspire you. So what's your jam? We're going to go to breakout groups now. We, for a variety of reasons, sort of divide these things into 3 categories of different types of policies. So under this land use category, and you're going to get to self-select into a breakout group. We have some prompts for what to do in those breakout groups. If you'd like taking notes, now is a great time to think, I'm going to volunteer to take notes. And we have a notes document that Zai, can you paste that in the chat in a second? Yeah, cool. And so under land use, we're talking about things like the permitting moratoria I mentioned, or bans on infrastructure, like we just passed in Whatcom County. Petaluma, gas station ban, super cool, what they did with that. Other types of zoning, what else is going on? And so the questions that we want you to answer here are like, who are you, where you're from, what have you seen happening in your city or county in terms of these types of policies? And what do you want to see next? And where could you use help? Because we'd love to help if we can. This category of buildings, all electric new construction, retrofitting buildings. So we take gas out of the buildings, decarbonize the buildings. New appliance standards. So appliances are all electric. Requirements for EV charging and new construction, other stuff like that. What do you got? And then finally in transportation, requiring municipal fleets to go all electric, ICE car sales bans, internal combustion engine cars, requirements for electric vehicle fleets for Uber, for Lyft, for anybody that city permits is an interesting approach. And also areas of the city that could be zero emission zones. You can drive there, but not if you emit. So maybe it's EVs, maybe it's walking, maybe it's pedestrian. So that sort of transportation approach. And so each of these breakout groups will have a nominal facilitator. It should be more cooperative, but I'll work in land use. Zai has volunteered for buildings. Jack has volunteered for transport. And we need note takers. So here's the prompts for the breakout groups. We need a note taker, like I said. Here are the introductions, what we can all do. Have the first go around. Hopefully it'll take about 10 minutes. The second go around, which fossil fuel policies now? What do you want to see next? And Zai will post, or I see 64 comments that I've missed. Zai, is there something I should know in these comments that I can't see?
We had one question, and I pasted the notes in the chat.
Okay.
And Woody also dropped a plug for Congas around gasoline, prohibiting new gasoline stations, which is great.
Awesome. Great work, Congas. Yeah, for sure. And so now is the time to create those 3 breakout rooms. And again, you pick your own and we'll do a report back. And Zai, if you already posted the notes document, everybody will see in that notes document all these same prompts, what notes to take and all the rest of that. And so if we're at 10:25, Laura, let's close the rooms at 10:45-ish, maybe 10:50 if we have that time, and come back and do a report back. Does that sound good?
That sounds great. And to answer Sue's question, breakout rooms, in order to join a breakout room, click the button at the bottom of the screen that says breakout rooms and select one of the three categories one of the three breakout rooms, and click the button that says join. If you don't see those options, you might need to update your Zoom account by clicking the top left-hand corner and check for updates. It should just take a moment.
There's one other thing too, like if you see that breakout room and you see the name of the breakout room, there's a number next to it. Go click on that number and it'll give you the option to join. Did everybody have enough time? I'm sort of curious if there was enough time in the other groups or if it was just us who were like rushing through. Enough time? More time some other time?
We just got to the second question that we were supposed to answer, but we had a great conversation.
Yeah, I think in transportation, we had a good brainstorming. We had a lot of good ideas come out, but we just scratched the surface. And I took advantage of the time to say, well, you know, our whole next summit is on transportation on August 20th. So we'll have 3 hours to talk about it then. So we clearly didn't have enough time to solve all the transportation issues in that time, but thanks for the opportunity to get the ball rolling.
Awesome. Thanks, Jack. Marianne, I see your hands up.
Yeah, I can't, the host has apparently disabled my video, but that's okay. Yeah, a little bit more time would have been helpful. Yeah, but we managed to jam through.
That's awesome. Well, so let's do a quick report back. I think perhaps Laura, you can correct me. We have until 11, or Steve? Cheryl's nodding. Cool. So maybe just a few minutes each. Would anybody like to report back from buildings?
Yes, absolutely. Our building electrification breakout room is really incredible. We heard from a lot of folks. Some have been electrifying their homes themselves and also working at the municipal level to pass gas bans, hookups to new buildings, and are really interested in continuing that to focus on getting retrofits included and building out on that initial effort. So thank you so much to everyone who shared in that group. That was incredible. Check out the notes if you want to hear more about it.
Cool. Thanks, Zai. How about transportation? Anybody volunteer to report back there?
I think Nick volunteered. Are you back with us, Nick? He said he had to step away for a minute. Why don't you do the other one first, then we'll come back to this.
Cool. Well, you know that phenomenon where you ask for volunteers and everybody steps back, leaving the one person in front? That was me, the person in front. But just to show that there's actually been a ton going on and folks working on land use and a bunch more coming up. But I think perhaps the most important takeaway that I got from that came from Eduardo at the end, which is how interconnected these different land use fights and issues are around the refinery corridor and the bay sort of broadly. And the example that he brought forward was of the expansion plans for the Oakland airport with 17 new gates, where not only would the jet fuel demand drive production in Richmond at Chevron and perhaps other refineries as well, but more and more air traffic, contributing pollution to everybody. We saw a couple of different connections between power plants, refineries, some plastics issues, trying to handle different or prevent the handling of different types of fossil fuels. But I think broadly, it seems like there's a lot of opportunity in and around these different municipalities in the Bay to actually take real action on fossil fuels with land use approaches. And so we have multiple connections going to happen. Going to send a follow-up email and connect folks to the policy list that we have on Stand Up Earth website, which I think, Zai, can you drop that link in the chat somewhere, like the policy list?
Yeah, let me get that for you just a minute.
Yeah, cool, thanks. But yeah, we just scratched the surface. I had 20 some people, and I think there's a lot of conversation left to be had. And with that, I'll pass it over to, who was it? Transportation.
Yeah, Nick, are you back?
Yes, I'm back.
Okay, go ahead and give us what you can. It's going to be hard to summarize because we talked about a lot of stuff.
That's okay. So one key point, I guess, was that Sonoma County already is working on moratorium, a statutory moratorium on new gas stations. They've, in the meantime, they have stopped 3 gas stations since 2019, but there are still 4 active proposals out there. Some groups are trying to add on EV charging or hydrogen facilities into new and existing gas stations, but the group is trying to prevent that because it just kind of muddies the water. Bill talked about bikes on BART. They're now 24/7 permission for bikes to be carried on BART. The new BART cars are not ideally equipped to store the bikes, but they're working on that. Green hydrogen heavy trucks are being promoted. Transition of medium heavy duty trucks from diesel to electric is also being worked on. There's a California State Bill number 372 that is addressing this. And also to get some investors for facilitating the EV transition, especially for smaller businesses. Expansion of bike lanes to facilitate the electric bikes, as well as general use of bikes, especially in Berkeley. Also, there was a thought of posting a notice at gas stations that would be similar to the carcinogenic warning that goes up, and in this case, to say that fossil fuels have devastating effects on the climate, et cetera, and basically as a warning sign. AC Transit, it was noted that they are replacing their entire fleet with hydrogen fuel cell vehicles. Don't know what the timeline was for that, but that's been proposed. That's been actually adopted. One problem that was noted is that the cost of heavy trucks, the big rigs, is at least $200,000 per truck. So to convert to EV means dropping a big investment. So that's something that would need to be addressed. And there was some advantage noted for hydrogen fuel cells for large trucks because they have a longer range and there's less time for refueling. So let's see. And Jack also posted in the chat a best practices for transportation transition. And he encouraged participation in the August 20th Summit on Transportation. I can pass it on now to buildings.
Cool. I think we had buildings. Thanks.
Oh, okay. I had stepped away. Okay.
Thanks. Yeah, no, that's fantastic. Thank you all so much for participating. One thing here is the notes document that was just generated by everybody during this call. Second, with the permission of the CEMTF folks, we'll send a quick email around to everybody who attended and just provide some additional resources. Should you want to get involved, we have every other monthly calls for elected officials and staff for cities and counties, or if you have somebody in your place who you want to get involved, send them our way and we'll suck them into the orbit of, we've got a couple hundred folks now around the country who have participated, who are elected officials or staffers who are working on these sorts of policies, and would love to hear from you about anything that we can do to help. With your local fight, we can help with all different types of digital organizing and working to turn people out and have really just a ton of resources, including pushing back against the gas industry. And with that, I'll hand it over to Zai real quick to talk just a bit about some of the equity issues, and we'll turn it back to the moderators.
Yes, thank you all so much. I just really wanted to emphasize the importance of equity in this work. It's really important to take time to figure out how to create an equitable and just transition off of fossil fuels. And an example is that in San Francisco, a very white-led effort to ban gas to hookups to new buildings kind of overlooked some objections from migrant communities that really should have taken the time to unpack that and work together. And we saw a great example of community coming together in Sacramento in their building electrification process. So If you want to talk more about that and learn different ways in which you can be equitable in your work to stop fossil fuel expansion, feel free to email me. I'll drop it in the chat now.
Hey. Okay, thank you. I want to thank Matt and Zai for excellent presentation and for involving people in a great community discussion of all these issues and making these links to everything that's going on across the country. I think it was always about building connections, and this is what really strengthens us. So with that, we're going to take a 5-minute stretch break, try and come back around 11:05, and we'll move to our closing presentation on second generation biofuels refining. So everybody stretch your legs a bit.
Steve, if while people are on the break, I'm going to put up a little toolkit on this. I'm going to share my screen, and this is a toolkit, and I'm also going to put it in the chat. These are items for fossil fuel infrastructure that our legislative team identified, and I just want to make sure that people get a chance to see this. And like I say, I just put it in the chat, but you can take a look at it on the screen. We'll just leave it up here during the, oops, if I can share my screen. Is it working? There we go. Okay, I'll try to enlarge it a little bit. Okay. Anyway, these are some things we talked about before today's workshop. Actually, there was a lot of ideas so far that I've heard this morning to add to this. So it's not complete, but it'll give you a little bit of idea of what we talked about going into this workshop. Okay, be back in 5, right?
Yep, be back in 5, everybody. Stretch your legs a bit and let's keep going. I hope everyone had a little bit of time to stretch and relax, and we'd like to start moving on to our closing presentation, which will deal with one of the most challenging issues we have in the Bay Area, which is this second generation of biofuels. Do we have a quote renewable diesel or the next fake climate solution? 2 of our refineries, Phillips 66 in Rodeo and Marathon in Martinez, have announced plans to move from petroleum refinery to diesel production based on vegetable oils and animal fats. They are calling this renewable diesel. Is this really a green project, or is this greenwashing? So we're going to have 2 experts in this area. Gary Hughes from Biofuels Watch, the Stay Grounded Network for Just Transition and Global Forest Coalition, and Charlie Davidson of Sunflower Alliance, the Rodeo Citizens Association, and a member of the Rodeo Hercules Fire Protection District. They will talk about how the fence line communities are faced with the huge demand for thousands of tens of thousands of square miles of agricultural land that would be required to produce these oils or fats. The yearly subsidies that are making this possible based on billions of dollars of low carbon fuel standards that these oil companies are taking advantage of. And whether or not, and also the fact that despite the call that these are renewable diesel, they are extremely high sources of greenhouse gases, and they require a huge amount of natural gas to produce the hydrogen necessary to make these biodiesels. So I will turn it over to Gary to start off our presentation on the land use issues that are associated with this program.
All right, thank you so much, Steve. I am trying to share a screen here to share some slides. I really appreciate Steve's introduction, and it's very much an honor for me to be here with everyone today as a part of this community effort. I have about 25 slides that I'm going to try to show as quickly as possible, like in about 15 minutes. The whole idea is to set the scene for Charlie, who's going to come up next and really be able to look closely at what's going on with the refineries themselves in terms of this conversion. I'd like to look at a bigger picture. I'm going to give a little bit of background on Biofuel Watch, some of the work that we're doing, but to address this trend towards bioenergy as we're forced to move away from fossil fuels. So hopefully this can provide some bigger picture context for what's happening with the refinery specifically, and that Charlie's really going to be able to drive in on all of that. So it's really an honor to be here and to be a part of this effort. Biofuel Watch is it's an international organization. Admittedly, we're very small, but we really focus on the land sector impacts of climate policy itself, really looking at the human rights issues, the trends towards bioenergy also require a lot of community involvement. That's why it's really been exciting to be a part of the community here as we engage on the refinery issues. For myself, it's been really exciting. It's 2.5 years now I'm working with Biofuel Watch, but Biofuel Watch is under the fiscal sponsorship of Global Justice Ecology Project, which the founders of GJEP were also founders of Native Forest Network, where I worked when I did my graduate work at the University of Montana in Missoula 20 years ago. So it's been a really exciting time working with Biofuel Watch, and this is what I am excited to convey with everyone here, is to really bring home the international aspects of our work for climate justice. To our organization, the truth is we put way more time and energy into cultivating international solidarity than we do, for instance, working on bipartisan solutions. We believe my energy is really better dedicated to working internationally. So we do a lot of work through the Global Forest Coalition, which is 100 community and indigenous organizations in more than 60 countries around the world. And what we're really confronting right now is how climate policy that gets advanced in the United States can be weaponized in the global south and to result in human rights violations and degradation, really, of the living earth on which we rely. So I think everyone who is in the Bay Area is very aware of the disinformation campaigns of the fossil fuel industry. Unfortunately, there seems to be less attention to how those actors who are really involved with the land sector, big ag, timber industry especially, are also constantly propagandizing the rest of us about what is going on with the land. And so, plantations are not a climate solution. I do a lot of work in Chile through Global Forest Coalition, and really want to drive home, for instance, the way that there's similarities between the timber industry, the way they operate in the global south and in California in particular. But what's going on, for instance, in places like Chile, the massive expansion of monoculture, exotic tree species, plantations has not resulted in the economic development that the proponents have bombarded us with disinformation about. Rather, it's made people poorer. So these are untenable circumstances. Biofuel Watch is really excited to have been a contributor to the Hoodwinked in the Hothouse, POP education report, which is out. I hope people check this out. There's a great section in here on bioenergy that was written by Biofuel Watch co-founder and co-director Rachel Smolker. Fundamentally, at the heart of the philosophy that guides Hoodwinked in the Hothouse is that we need to repair our relationship with the land, and that we see a lot of what's proposed as a climate solution really is just a perpetuation of business as usual. And we need to counter this in a full way, because Biofuel Watch, our experience now with how bioenergy is being promoted as a solution for getting off fossil fuels, we're seeing the devastation start to manifest itself in many circles around the world. In the upper right-hand corner, there's kind of a long distance shot of this Drax power plant in Yorkshire. I've never been to Europe, but this is one of the emblematic examples of what's happening with the move from fossil fuels towards bioenergy. Is this is a coal-fired plant that's now burning wood pellets from around the world. Now, one really exciting initiative that Biofuel Watch has been able to pursue with Stand.Earth, their expertise and grounding in British Columbia has been, for instance, fighting against the acquisition by Drax of a company called Pinnacle Pellets in BC. The evidence is there that they're logging old growth forest to make wood pellets. They're burning these wood pellets at the Drax facility in the UK. So for instance, one of the campaigns we've done is with this broad campaign that's trying to put pressure on BlackRock to divest from fossil fuels, also is to divest from biomass. And that's been really an exciting opportunity. And it is an imperative to do this because we're seeing that the move towards bioenergy is really strong. There was a lot of excitement about an announcement with the annual report from the International Energy Agency this spring about the imperative of ending investments in oil and gas. But it also promoted a switch towards bioenergy that's really, this is not a sustainable future for what they're describing. And, modern bioenergy generation is, not just using a wood to heat your home or to cook some food. This is, really utility scale bioenergy. And this is really, portending some very, problematic development issues on the horizon. The industry will come back, and we'll hear this constantly within the Bay Area around the proposed refinery conversions. And as they talk about different feedstocks, they'll talk about sustainability standards. And I think it's really an imperative that our community have some good language around sustainability standards and certification. I've worked on certification for 20 years. I'm very concerned about what's happening with certification, and our organization as well raises alarms about the inadequacy of certification systems for assuring sustainability. This spring, Greenpeace came out with a report called Destruction Certified. And this is Greenpeace International, and they've worked deeply on a lot of certification schemes around the world. And they looked closely at some major certification schemes, and some of them have already been mentioned by the operators here in the Bay who are supporting the repurposing of refineries to biofuels. In particular, the International Sustainability and Carbon Certification. This is a scheme that's not protecting forests, and it's not protecting communities. But here in California also, we're very concerned, and I just can't avoid but say this, is that, the redwoods are being decimated under the guise of being managed sustainably and certified by the Forest Stewardship Council. And these are overflights from last year of Green Diamond Resource Company holdings that are all certified FSC. And these clear cuts are bleeding into the atmosphere. But this is forest certification here in California. So I want to just flag for folks, if this is the result of a certification scheme here in California, I really caution people to think about what's happening with these certification schemes in Indonesia, in Paraguay, in Chile, or in other places. So we need to be really aware of what's already been done to help us be informed to interpret what's being foisted upon our communities now as a supposed climate solution. As I find this a really important opportunity for me to say to everyone that as I've been working on this in this community, one of the things that impresses me so much is how well everyone understands these issues and how articulate everyone is about this. So what I'm saying is not necessarily new or different, because people here are really good about this. I do want to emphasize, though, we've looked really strongly at what the possible feedstock possibilities are for these refinery conversions, and it's pretty clear that it would be predominantly soy. So just to run through it, make sure we understand that soy is a high deforestation risk commodity, that any increase in demand for soy for either fuel, food, or feed will push the monoculture model further into endangered ecosystems. In particular, there's really strong connections between the livestock industry and soy, and sometimes the soy industry is able to get away saying we didn't cause the deforestation because it was the cattle ranchers that did it, but they work together. So let's be aware of that. And then ultimately through Global Forest Coalition, we're working very closely with partners on the ground in places like Paraguay. And there's a public health crisis from the soy monoculture model. And people there have been very clear in communicating to us that it's important that our community in California understands the dangers of increasing demand for products like soy. What's driving the biofuel refinery sector growth in our area is the idea that this is a climate-friendly alternative. This is being driven under the rhetoric of responding to climate change. So the Renewable Fuel Standard is providing financial impetus without going deep into the California Low Carbon Fuel Standard, but the incentives from that market mechanism are also driving the impetus. And then the narrative really about renewable diesel, but also sustainable aviation fuel, and the CORSIA mechanism, the carbon offset reduction scheme for international aviation, has two real elements to it. One is an offset scheme, a massive emissions trading scheme. We're not going to get into offsets, but the other is the issue with promoting aviation biofuels. The state of California has already been made very aware of the dangers of CORSIA because of their promotion of the California Tropical Forest Standard specifically to serve the aviation industry. And when we fought against this, we made it clear that major developments are on the horizon with aviation biofuels that threaten communities and forests. Eduardo did a great job in the land use section of identifying the connection of the proposed expansion of the Oakland Airport with the possibilities of driving towards these refinery conversions because of the way that the aviation industry is so hot for these fuels, to be able to, tell the public that they're addressing the climate impacts from flying. So this is going to merit a lot more attention from our community in the future. So I'm getting ready to turn it over now to Charlie. Again, it's been really an honor to be here. This is kind of a rhetorical question. Is this pivot to biofuels a transition or trap? I put it out to you. I'm pretty concerned about it being a trap. I think a lot of what's happening around climate is a trap. So our organization is very proud to be a part of this report that was released just early this summer, The Big Con. Definitely encourage people to check this out. Really also looks a lot at the corporate capture of the development of climate policy, which I think Sacramento is like a micro example of how climate policy development has been captured by the polluters. In terms of just transition, Biofuel Watch is really proud to be a part of the international, largely European Stay Grounded network, really working for a just transition for the aviation industry, a just transition for transportation. And it's really been an honor to be here, to be a part of this. I'm handing this over to Charlie so he can really go into the details on what's happening with the refinery conversions themselves. And hopefully I've been quick enough here to keep more time available for later on, and then also added some kind of unique information to all of this discussion about what, pursuing a true, like grassroots just transition means for the Bay Area. So thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to contribute.
My name is Charlie Davidson. I live in Hercules, which is 12 miles north of Berkeley. And right north of us is the town of Rodeo. It's an unincorporated area that's where Phillips 66 is located. You can see here that Phillips 66 is cheek to jowl with the community of Rodeo, and the closest community residents live within several hundred feet of the refinery at the largest housing project in Contra Costa County. This presentation is about the two Bay Area refineries that are promoting the world's largest biofuels project. Phillips 66, that you can see in the map, and also 12 miles to the west, also on the Carquinez Strait at the top part of Contra Costa County, is Marathon, and they are also going to biofuels. And just as a preliminary, Marathon closed down actually before the pandemic, and Phillips 66 was almost going to close at the beginning of the pandemic because they were operating at almost 50% of capacity. And this is when the Biofuels project popped up and got temporary preliminary approval from Contra Costa County, and will be going through an environmental impact report very, very soon. That should drop imminently. Next slide, please. These refineries plan to repurpose their petroleum refining equipment in order to manufacture a substitute or, quote, drop-in biodiesel fuel from vegetable oil, and animal fat. Each of these refineries would need to have repurposed tens of thousands of square miles of agricultural land for food to fuels conversion for, quote, renewable diesel or jet fuel. These projects are subsidized with billions of dollars each per year of low carbon fuel standard and other government credits at $3.32 per gallon or more. These subsidies for Phillips 66 would amount to approximately $3.4 billion per year. Next slide. And by the way, that's more than the actual value of the refinery if it were up for sale. And it's actually the current value of the Chevron refinery, which is even bigger. So with the biofuels conversion at Phillips 66, some of the units are going to be taken down, such as the carbon plant. Go back, please.
Sorry.
Such as the carbon plant. You can see that there's very inefficient pollution controls on there. Half of the Phillips 66's petroleum coke, which is cooked in this unit, goes here and at 2,000 degrees, and the other half of the refinery's petroleum coke goes to Levin Terminal and is shipped out with coal. What is staying, the Phillips 66 coker unit, that produces the petroleum coke that went to the carbon plant. And it's going to be staying because Phillips 66 in their biofuels project plans to repurpose the coker to convert Chevron's toxic fluid catalytic cracker slurry waste into carbon electrodes. Next slide, please. Second generation biofuels hydrocrack vegetable oil or animal fats using vast amounts of refinery made hydrogen gas. Counterintuitively, second generation biofuels are extremely high greenhouse gas producers at the refinery level, equivalent to refining the heaviest petroleum products and consuming vast amounts of hydrogen manufactured on site from natural gas. Traditional refineries hydrocrack petroleum using hydrogen under extreme pressures and temperatures to make diesel and jet fuel. Second generation biofuels use repurposed refinery hydrocracker units. Next slide, please. And you can see this is the worldwide global demand for hydrogen, where the light blue bars represent refinery hydrogen, and just under that is ammonia. Most of the ammonia is used for fertilizer. Oil refineries and fertilizers are the primary uses of refinery hydrogen. Next slide, please. Where is hydrogen made and where does it come from? The refinery steam methane reforming units harvest hydrogen, circled on the left side of the formula, from methane and water, which is on the right, on the left side of the formula, and the hydrogen is on the right. And this is a dirty fossil fuel project. Next slide, please. And this is methane. You don't have to sweat over it, but you can see that CH4 is methane and the carbon captures the hydrogen. And that's how natural gas is manufactured in the earth and by nature. Next slide, please. And you can see the fugitive refinery methane emissions. Most of those come from the steam methane reforming units. And you can, on the farthest to the right of the graph, you can see the Shell refineries methane emission. And all these methane emissions in the light blue bars were done recently by an airplane flyover having a methane detector, which is one of the best ways to determine methane emissions from a refinery, where they could capture the methane plume. And so they circled around each refinery a number of times and returned to them also a number of times to double check their information. And you can see the bright colored bars are former studies that were showing methane, fugitive methane emissions from their refineries. But when they did the airplane flyover, the values were 6 to 11 times higher than what they'd ever detected previously. And just to note that methane has 80 times greater global warming effect than carbon dioxide over a 20-year period, and methane contributes to ozone formation. Next slide, please. So this is what a steam methane reforming unit looks like as a schemata for the hydrocracker unit, excuse me. This is where the diesel is produced currently. And what goes into it, you can see on the circled on the lower left. First, you put in fossil fuel made steam reforming hydrogen made from natural gas, heavy petroleum. Put this under extreme pressures within the vessel. And the pressures are so high, the vessel wall is over 7 inches thick. And there's also a catalyst bed that the hydrogen bubbles through and mixes up with the petroleum product. And that produces jet fuel and diesel. Next slide, please. And this is the reconfigured biodiesel hydrocracker used for hydrogenating vegetable oil. And so instead of putting in petroleum, soy oil, tallow, and used cooking oil and other vegetable oils can go in, also mixed under high pressure and catalyst with hydrogen. And the product here is biodiesel. And I'll explain exactly how this process is different than a normal hydrocracking from petroleum products. Next slide, please. So if you look over here on the lower right, in the hydrocracker, the extreme pressures and temperatures of hydrogen gas break apart the hydrogen molecule, which is H2, into reactive singular hydrogen atoms. And it's these activated hydrogen atoms that can modify vegetable oil into so-called renewable diesel and jet fuel. Next slide, please. And just to show the power of hydrogen, when you mix it with oxygen and ignite it, it produces a massive amount of heat. So we're talking about hydrogen is a powerful energy carrier. Next slide, please. And so going into biofuels, the fats and oils are complex triglyceride molecules. Most people know when they go to and have a lab done through their physician that they measure the triglycerides and free fatty acids and cholesterol, and those will tell you some of your cardiovascular status. Soy oil and vegetable oils come as triglycerides, and the hydrocracker hydrogen breaks apart these carbon-oxygen bonds. And you can see that it's a complex molecule. That's where the tri comes from, where you have the 3 fatty acids hooked into a glycerol molecule using the oxygen bond called the ester bond. And so the next slide is a little bit more complex. Don't worry, we're just going to go through it real fast. I just want to show you how hydrogen works and where it works. The step number one is to split the glycerol on the left from the 3 fatty acids on the right to remove the 3 oxygen. This process is called hydrodeoxygenation, noting that triglycerides have a large amount of oxygen built into them to hold the molecule together. There's another oxygen, that's number 2, that's removed from the hydrogen. And the number 3 is the double bond on the lower part, where you want to remove those double bonds and convert them to single bonds and put as many hydrogens in there as possible. The final result, the biodiesel, will look somewhat similar to the top picture, the stearate, which will be straight hydrocarbon bonds with no oxygen in them. Next slide, please. And a little bit more hydrogen has to go into this system. The glycerol is immediately converted in the presence of hydrogen to propane. That releases water. So we're talking about a system that is full of oxygen, propane, high pressure, hydrogen, and catalyst at high temperatures. And so what could go wrong? Next slide, please. I'd also like to mention that hydrocrackers are using petroleum are not the safest unit at a refinery. There's a number of problems that have gone on and have been cited by the Air District and that also have produced potential danger to humans and workers and have actually killed workers in the past, but not locally here. The Phillips 6, going to the size of Phillips 66 project, their Rodeo Renewed project, so-called, was originally 55,000 barrels per day and is now increased to 80,000 barrels per day of their projected capacity. Their current capacity is about 120,000, so the project is significantly increased in size. Regarding land use, this is a very important thing, and it gets back to what Gary was talking about. There's 57 gallons of soybean oil produced per acre planted. So that Phillips 66's use of soybeans oil could translate to 33,600 square miles of soybean, and this is nearly the size of Indiana. So the size of Indiana is that green line on the graph, on the bar graph. And so you could see that the amount of soybean oil potentially used in the Phillips 66 project has increased significantly. And that's the caveat there, is that there will also be probably other oils. It's certainly tallow and other vegetable oils, but soybean oil in the United States will be the largest available source of vegetable oil and plant oils for these kind of projects. Next slide, please. Turning around the fossil fuel ship. Recently, Governor Newsom issued the State of California Executive Order N7920. It states that 100% of in-state sales of new passenger cars and trucks will be zero emission by 2035, and 100% of medium and heavy duty vehicles in the state will be zero emission by 2045 and by 2035 for shorter transport drayage trucks. Next slide, please. What is the function and the potential for hydrogen fuel cell long haul heavy duty vehicles? It should be noted that it's less likely that hydrogen will be used for automobiles, but for long haul heavy duty vehicles, batteries would take up most of the space and weight that would be used for transporting various different products. So it's more likely that hydrogen is going to be going into the long haul heavy duty vehicles. And so this is recently a new project that has come up from the Center of Transportation Environment, where they recently were awarded a grant to support the deployment of 30 hydrogen fuel cell electric trucks in Northern California. And they've decided to site the hydrogen fueling station adjacent to the Port of Oakland to fuel up to 50 vehicles. These long-haul fuel cell electric trucks have a proven range of more than 400 miles on a single fill of hydrogen and can run from Oakland to Fresno. Next slide, please. So in the hydrogen fuel cells, we're talking about making electricity from hydrogen, and it also produces, making electricity from hydrogen, and it also produces water as a side effect. This is a proton exchange membrane. The H is there, the H plus in the middle of it are stripped off the H2 that is on the left, and the electrons go up and produce electricity, which will run the electrical engine within the fuel cell vehicles. So the fuel cell vehicles is actually an electric vehicle being produced from a proton exchange membrane where the fuel is the hydrogen. Next slide, please. And you can see here, we're on the lower right-hand side, the very, very low life cycle greenhouse gas emissions or carbon dioxide emissions per kilometer of mile traveled from the fuel cell truck produced from renewable hydrogen is much, much a fraction, maybe 20% at most, of the diesel biofuels, which is the second graph on the left. Next slide, please. How about turning things around with the proton exchange membrane? The green hydrogen is made by splitting water using electrolysis, renewable electricity for electrolysis. So solar PV and wind can produce the electricity, and the same very similar proton exchange membrane fuel cell can then go to produce hydrogen. Next slide, please. And so, next slide. No, that's too further. Yeah, there you go. So this shows the interchangeability of proton exchange membrane technology. Going in one hand, we can produce hydrogen from electrolysis, and another could be a fuel cell to produce electricity for transportation and other uses. Next slide, please. The hydrogen economy. So let's go a little bit bigger than just a single truck. We have the renewable energy from photovoltaic solar panels and wind generators. And that energy can go into electrolysis systems where the hydrogen can be stored for long-term storage. And that storage would be much longer than it would be possible in a battery. Then that hydrogen storage can go back into a fuel cell, produce electricity that can either go into a grid interconnection to balance off grid when there's not enough electricity from other sources. And it can also go into energy storage through batteries, which have a different function than hydrogen in terms of stabilizing the grid from microsecond to microsecond. Next slide, please. How big can hydrogen electrolysis systems become, and how much hydrogen can they produce? Is it realistic in the real world? Or are we talking about an unrealistic technology? Well, 3 years ago, people talked about these things, they were planning them, but the technology has come along very, very rapidly. It's been developed over many years, but it's rapidly accelerated. In Australia, there's a plan to co-locate a 300 megawatt solar field, which is about 1 square mile of photovoltaic panels, with a 200 megawatt electrolytic hydrogen facility. That should be finished in a couple years. Next slide, please. And that system would produce approximately several months of hydrogen for a biofuels project, just for a sense of scale. But we can go much bigger than that. The new US Green Hydrogen Catapult initiative will target the deployment of 25 gigawatts. We're talking about 100 times the size of what I mentioned previously of green hydrogen production by 2026. The green hydrogen costs will drop to below $2 per kilogram, which is competitive with the steam methane reforming refinery hydrogen, and will increase US green hydrogen production 50-fold. Worldwide, green hydrogen could supply up to 25% of the world's energy needs by 2050, used for heavy industry, transportation, and long-term grid energy storage. These projects are underpinned by a recent emergence of a strong hydrogen-focused national hydrogen strategies. Next slide, please. The Western Green Hydrogen Club hub is an international consortium in Southwest Australia that wants to build the world's biggest hydrogen renewable energy hub in order to convert wind and solar power into 4 million tons of green hydrogen. The group of energy companies proposed over a 15,000 square mile project area that could have a 50 gigawatt capacity compared to 54 gigawatts of generation capacity for all the coal, gas, and renewable plants currently in the national energy market in Australia. Australia's biggest 3-unit coal plant is almost 3 gigawatts. So this project would be equal to 50 large-size coal-fired power plants. And the first fuels should be shipped and ready to go by 2030. Next slide. How about the land use limits of green growth? The Australian Environmental Department has rejected plans for 11 gigawatt expansion of wind and solar powered hydrogen and ammonia complex in northwestern Australia. It decided against the full 26 gigawatt hub due to, quote, unacceptable impacts on wetlands and migratory bird species. The Aussie federal and state governments had already approved an initial 15 gigawatt of capacity, but the National Environmental Department has now rejected the planned 11 gigawatt expansion. And that's the last slide here. And I'd just like to mention here that the $3.4 billion a year of subsidies for Phillips 66, a plant that was almost shuttered, that was constructed initially in 1896, is a pretty big sum. Over 10 years, that would be $34 billion. Well, there's, talking about just transition with the workers. If we took just $2 million of that $34 billion we took $2 billion, that would go to give $2 million to each of the workers to just walk away, and combine that with their pension funds and be wealthy for life. And that would be double the number of workers there available to at the cost of $2 billion at a fraction of the $34 billion. So this is a very expensive project. There's because triglycerides have a lot of oxygen in them, and the various conditions with the excess propane, high pressure, temperature, and catalyst, there could be risk of potential runaway reactions. It's not guaranteed to be completely safe. These are new projects. They really have never been done before on this scale anywhere in the world. And also Phillips 66, just in terms of local, Rodeo is one of the most rundown cities in the Bay Area. It's run down for years. It's been owned by a number of, the refinery's been owned by various different refinery companies. Before, the town was actually a fairly wealthy, small little town where there was mostly workers there from the refinery. They had movie shows, a small department store. People went on dates, walking down Parker Avenue. Well, now it is completely run down, and Phillips 66, their total amount of community benefits, which is typically charity and nothing negotiated, amounts to about $750,000 per year, which is a pittance. So anyways, this is a very interesting project, and it's a conundrum for the community, and it's been an interesting process learning about this project, and it'll be interesting to see how we can modify it. I have my questions about how possible it is to actually stop the project. So I'll leave it back to you and for further discussion and questions. Thank you.
We have a short session. We can take maybe 5-10 minutes of questions if people have any questions for Charlie or Gary.
Nick Peterson has his hand raised.
Okay, Nick, why don't you go?
Yeah, I put it in the chat too. So what portion of the source oils, vegetable oil and fats, just come from already, is just waste product versus our virgin product produced just to be refined? it seems like at that, I think a lot of people like biofuel to some degree better than regular diesel because they have this idea that it's already, it's a closed loop. This is already soybeans that are being grown to make oil for restaurants, then the restaurants recycle it, and the carbon goes in the atmosphere, goes back into the plants, blah, blah, blah. But it sounds like what you're talking about is that the scale of this would require very little of that product. Is that correct?
There's limited amounts of used cooking oil that completely comes from restaurants. So the more these projects come online, and there's multiple projects that will come online for biofuels, the used cooking oil market will be much more constrained than soy oil, for example, or other agricultural oils. So yes, it is a factor there. Right now, the companies are competing to make contracts as fast as they can, but that will be limited. Unless it, say, comes from China or something, they'll be less likely to be able to ship this in large amounts. So, and they can't easily just requisition forest lands for hydrogen or convert existing, they can't requisition, they can requisition soy oil from agricultural lands in other countries or in the United States. And so that would be very difficult to have a significant or major amount of the biofuels coming from used cooking oils. It will be a factor. Some refineries will probably have larger access to that.
And this is Gary. I'd like to add one thing about feedstocks, and this is just to, plant in everyone's imagination that right now, under the low carbon fuel standard, there is a refiner in Paramount World Energy that is manufacturing sustainable aviation fuel, and they bring in tankers full of tallow from Australia. So if you can imagine then tankers bringing tallow into the bay for these refineries. Ultimately, though, the used cooking oil is an extremely constrained feedstock. There's just not enough of it to ever scale it up.
So so you're talking about 2%, 10%? I mean, what percent?
Yes, it's in the single digits. Yep, between 3 to 6. Yeah.
The other aspect of your presentation that I was surprised about is it sounds like, the old biodiesel process from cooking oil. There's one process where the hydrogen is part of the whole process, whereas it sounds like this second generation biofuels, they're using methane to harvest hydrogen, which means more use of, is that process then, if I understand correctly, releasing more carbon than the first generation biofuel?
Yeah, much more carbon. I didn't really go into the difference between first generation and second generation biofuels, biodiesel. Second generation biofuels, we're producing biodiesel here, which is a drop-in diesel. It can go right into a diesel engine. Eventually, possibly some of the engine can be configured for 100% biodiesel, but for example, jet fuel has to be mixed with petroleum jet fuel, and it's also the case currently with this drop-in diesel here for second generation diesel, that it will be mixed with petroleum diesel. The first generation biodiesel is a much simpler process. It does not require hydrogen. It simply uses methanol to add onto the free fatty acids. So it's
Charlie, you need to be a little
concerned. Yeah, so basically what happens there is first generation biodiesel is damaging for engines, and they have no control for being blocked up in the fuel line during cold weather.
Okay, any other questions from other people? Okay, Charlie, Gary, thank you for those detailed and deep discussions. There's obviously a lot to take in here. I've put in the chat if all the people who have made presentations could send copies of that to me. Jack and I will work on making sure they're available to everybody. Okay, with that, we will move to our ending session led by Kat Ramis, where we're going to look at a little visioning of what our cities could look like in 100 years. So,
soy oil, canola oil, palm oil, and a lot of other products. If you buy,
excuse me, whoever that is, can they mute themselves, please?
Everyone again. Yeah, so we've gotten into some more details. Sometimes this can be a pretty intense kind of knowing of all of the things that are necessary, all the things that are happening, all the things that we have to kind of go up against. And one of the things that we do in our community organizing spaces when we're engaging community is really trying to bring community into a space of their vision. What is the community's vision in a certain amount of time? What do you want to see? What do you want for your children? What do you want for future generations? And, you know, we can get stuck in a lot of the detail, and I think that that's very important, but I think that sometimes we need to take pause, take a break, sit back and be inspired and dream. And so I haven't done it in a large group like this before. Usually it's smaller scales, so we're gonna have to adjust a little bit. But I'm going to bring you into kind of like a guided visualization. And so if you have paper, if you have anything to draw with, or you just want to kind of flow through a few moments, have that nearby, because you can draw, you can write words, whatever may come to mind. And I will frame it with some words from Grace Lee Boggs, and then we'll move into the process. So here are some words. People are aware that they cannot continue in the same old ways, but they are immobilized because they cannot imagine an alternative. We need a vision that recognizes that we are at one with the great turning points in human history when the survival of our planet and the restoration of our humanity require great change in our ecological, economic, political, and spiritual values. So I'm going to invite us to just dream together in what all of this energy is that we're putting into this work could look like. I want us to expand our collective capacity to envision the future we're cultivating with the next generations. And so I can imagine that you can either bring your eyes to a lowering of your gaze, or close your eyes if you feel more comfortable. You can come off of your video screen and just focus on what's in here, and part of what you've already been hearing today. And I want you to just imagine this interconnected web of people committed to this work. What might we accomplish together by maintaining this deep, deep commitment? How might we evolve together? And for those of us who are Back to the Future fans, you can get into your DeLorean. Let's all get in our DeLorean right now and zoom forward 100 years. And I want you to really take in what 100 years from now may look like if all of this work that we're talking about today, that we've been involved in, actually comes to fruition. What do you see? What is the landscape like? What is around you? What are these structures? And what's true about this time? Culturally, politically, environmentally, what is true? And I'm going to put those questions into the chat. And just continue to, you can draw, you can write. I'm going to play a little bit of music for just a minute or so, and just think about those questions. What do you see? What is the landscape like? What is around you? What are the structures? Who do you see there with you? Who is there? And what is true about that moment? So I'll give you all a minute or so. I'm just gonna play this really quickly to give you some inspiration. It's not playing. Oh, there we go. What do you see? Who is around you? What is the landscape like? Bring in all of your senses. What do you smell? What can you touch? What is making you smile? What is bringing you joy in what you're seeing? And normally we would have more time. But I want to explain a little bit of why we do this as well. Is, part of the reason is to stay inspired and to infuse hope into an otherwise somewhat weary kind of struggle that sometimes seems like it has no end in sight. And so by visioning and reworking and bringing more and more detail into the vision, you can kind of work backwards from that 100 years and go backwards to 50 and 20 and 10 and 5. And that can help inform the planning. So if you're at 100 years, what's true about 50 years and what has to happen in that time? What's true about 20? What's true about 10? And you start to formulate the plan so that in 100 years, everything that you were envisioning is true. And I'm just going to share my screen with an image of one of the groups that has done this together, just so that you can see, you can take all of the ideas that you have, bring that all together into one space, maybe share it with a graphic designer. Those are always fun. And here is one of the visions that a group of I would say about 20 or 30 folks got together and did this. And this is just a beautiful source of inspiration. This can be put large on a screen, something that we can have, that we can look at every time that we're coming into a meeting together as a source of inspiration, as a way to see everyone's voice, everyone's ideas, everyone's vision in the larger collective. So I just want to end it there, and I want to thank everyone for joining me in this. You can take that activity and extend it out, give some more time, give it some more breathing, and see what comes up in the different spaces where you're organizing as a source of inspiration. So thank you.
Wow.
Thank you, Kat.
Thank you, Kat. That was amazing. Go ahead, Steve.
I was going to say, take it away, Cheryl. You're up.
Okay.
Comment.
Wow, that was such an inspiring exercise. I mean, what I was thinking was this green buildings, literally and otherwise, and multi-generations walking down the street hand in hand talking, and having green and flowers, and racism wasn't an issue, and I didn't see any homelessness, and I didn't see any greenhouse gases. It was just like a beautiful scene, and your picture captured it as well. So, I mean, today has been really, really, really great, and I appreciate everyone. I learned so much. I wish I knew more, so I'm going to try to get more. And Charles, I mean, that just took me back. I was like, whoa, Yeah, that was just incredible. You know, I remember back in the day learning CO2 and all the hydrogen, you know, the abbreviations or acronyms H and CO and H2O and all those. And so it took me back to that time. And wow, I wish I understood it more now, you know, but you enlightened me so much. And everyone, it was just like an incredible day. Thank you, Steve. Thank you to the CEMTF steering committee, logistics and planning and legislative, Jack, Amos, everyone here. Thank you for joining us. And, you know, it's like, we can do this. We can have a better future. We just have to keep hope alive and pray for a better tomorrow. So everyone, enjoy the rest of your day. I know I am. I'm waiting for my dad to arrive. It's going to be exciting. He just retired at 92. This is his first summer off. And it is like 50 zillion years, who knows? And he's driving here, you know, from Arizona, but he's from New York. So it's going to be a great weekend for me, and I hope so for all of y'all too. And look for the next CEMTF second virtual summit series. The third one is on clean and just transportation. So look forward to that in August. I believe it's the 20th. And our next CEM general meeting is the 18th of August. So you're all welcome to come back and join us. And thank you all so much for this amazing presentation today. Have a blessed day and a blessed weekend. Stay healthy, be safe, wear your mask. We're still in COVID, the numbers are going up. Double mask all the time, wash your hands, do all that stuff, because we have to stay healthy, be safe. All right, take care.